Welcome to today's Explainer. We usually jump into these sessions with a ton of high energy, but today we're going to do something a little different. We're just going to slow down, take a deep breath, and look really closely at a deeply misunderstood human experience, emotional shutdown. If you're someone who goes quiet when life gets a bit too heavy, or maybe you love someone who does, well, this Explainer is here to help you finally make sense of that silence.
So, picture this scenario. You're right in the middle of a conversation. Maybe it's an argument that's been brewing for weeks, or maybe someone is asking you something really important and you have to reach deep down inside for the answer. The room starts to feel just a little too loud, the pressure is building, everyone is staring, just waiting for you to speak. And then, nothing. The words don't just fail you, they literally vanish.
What happens next is this profound, almost overwhelming physical sensation. Your throat tightens up, your mind wanders off somewhere far, far away. It honestly feels like a heavy, invisible curtain has just dropped down right between you and the rest of the world. You're still there physically, right? You're sitting on the couch, looking at the person in front of you, but emotionally, you've gone entirely off the grid. You kind of watch yourself pull away, and even as your brain is saying, I should just say something, you find that you simply can't. And it's so important to understand that this is a slow fade. It's not a calculated choice, and it's definitely not a power move to punish anyone.
Let's look at Section 1, what it actually is, the nervous system science.
We really need to move past this idea that going quiet is just a personality quirk, or worse, a sign of emotional immaturity. What you're experiencing is actually called emotional shutdown, or the freeze response. Researchers like Dr. Peter Levine, who has spent decades looking into the nervous system, show us that this freeze response is just as hardwired into our biology as fight or flight. When your nervous system senses a level of emotional overwhelm that it just cannot process in real time, it pulls the emergency brake. It's trying to protect you. So during this intense emotional flooding, the part of your brain that literally produces language goes quieter. When someone is begging you to just talk to me, your brain has already prioritized something way more urgent, keeping you held together.
The really heartbreaking part of this biological response is the massive gap between what people see on the outside and what you're actually going through on the inside. Externally, people just see still water. They think you're being indifferent, cold, or even contemptuous. But internally, your reality is a completely chaotic storm. You are deep in processing. You're rapidly self-reflecting, examining every single angle, and stress-testing every potential word because you're terrified of saying something that you can never take back. You aren't shutting people out. You're desperately trying to hold yourself in.
Which brings us to Section 2, where silence comes from, tracing the origins of survival.
This instinct to just go completely quiet rarely appears out of thin air when we're adults. It's actually a highly effective, deeply ingrained survival skill. Think about it. None of us were born quiet. When we're babies and toddlers, we express our pain loudly, we don't apologize for it. But as psychologist John Bowlby showed us with his foundational work on attachment theory, the way we handle pain is directly inherited from our earliest relationships. If you grew up in a house where your vulnerability was just dismissed, or your tears bought you a lecture, basically if your emotions were treated as inconveniences, your brain learned a really devastating lesson. It learned that reaching out doesn't work. It learned that showing weakness is actually dangerous. So you adapted. You learned a fierce and frankly painful kind of self-sufficiency.
And this perfectly captures the idea of avoidant or disorganized attachment. When the very person who was supposed to be your source of love and safety was also a source of fear or unpredictability, your nervous system learned to freeze as its default setting. But here's the ultimate tragedy of any survival strategy. It almost always outlives the environment that created it. The silence that kept you safe when you were a kid, it now leaves you trapped in these avoidant patterns as an adult, long after the original danger has passed.
Let's explore Section 3, what it looks like in relationships when silence meets pressure. So when we carry this quiet survival mechanism into our adult relationships, it gets almost entirely misunderstood by the very people who love us most, and it creates this devastating repetitive loop. It starts when some kind of overwhelm triggers your silence. Your partner instantly feels this sudden drop in temperature in the room. And because they don't understand the nervous system science we just talked about, they interpret your silence as rejection, or even as a weapon. So naturally they escalate, they push harder, they demand an answer. But because your brain reads that added pressure as a new threat, you're forced to withdraw even deeper into the freezer spots. Basically, the harder they push, the further you disappear. But what's actually driving your withdrawal is usually the exact opposite of what your partner thinks. You aren't retreating to punish them, you're retreating to protect them. You intuitively know that if you speak while you're outside your window of tolerance, that emotional sweet spot where real, healthy communication can actually happen, what comes out is just going to be unfiltered pain that could absolutely blow the relationship apart. So you wait. You stress test your words. You're making sure that when you finally do speak, it's a carefully considered conclusion, not just some damaging knee-jerk reaction.
Honestly, doing this requires an immense amount of emotional integrity. In a world where so many of us react instantly, shouting the very first thought that pops into our heads and maybe meaning half of it, you do the exact opposite. You say less, but you mean all of it. When those words finally leave your mouth, they have been rigorously checked for fairness, accuracy, and truth.
And that brings us to Section 4, validating the silence, the bittersweet close. As we wrap up our explainer today, I just want us to take a moment to sit with everything we've uncovered. I'm not going to give you some catchy 5-step plan to fix your silence. Instead, if you're the person who has lived inside this silence your entire life, watching people constantly misread you, feeling like you're somehow too much but also not enough, and carrying the heavy guilt of your own quiet, I really want you to hear this. You were never broken. You are not cold, and you're certainly not manipulative. You were just protecting yourself, the only way your nervous system knew how. You built this quiet sanctuary to survive. And you know what? It worked. It got you here.
And if you're someone who loves a person who shuts down, I really hope you can now see that their stillness is not distance. It is the deepest, most considered kind of presence. So, to both of you, I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. What if the key to true connection isn't about forcing the words to come out faster, but learning to sit together in that uncomfortable silence, trusting that when it's finally safe enough, the words will find their way out?